Welcome to the number six episode of the PEMpodcast, Psychic Eye Mystery Podcast. I'm your host, Victoria Laurie, with my trusty sidekick and sister, Sandy.
Hello.
What? No.
I said hello.
Oh, I thought you said no. Disowned you. You're done.
Yes.
We got to start again. Hello and welcome to the sixth episode of the PEMpodcast, Psychic Eye Mystery Podcast. I am your host, Victoria Laurie, here with my trusty sidekick and BFF sister from the same mister, Sandy, who is doing all of these fantastic researching all of these fantastic mysteries. Sandy, you've just been doing such a fantastic job, and I love today's installment. I absolutely love it. So
very intriguing story for sure.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's start with I don't think we want to recap last week's yet. I think that you and I need to talk about that a little bit more. And we'll recap last week's next week.
If that's what you'd like to do. I think
we'll recap at some point later.
If necessary. I think it was a pretty straightforward case. So
yeah, agreed for sure. So we are going to start with book, right? Let's talk like today's theme is mafia. And it fits right in because my anecdotes involve mafia connections. We have a story about our own grandfather that involves the mafia, and
he wasn't in the mafia.
Unfortunately,
let me just preempt that he wasn't in it.
No, he was quite a character, our grandfather. Legend. He was a legend in our family. Anyway, so the second book in my Psychic Eye Mystery series, Better Read Than Dead, available everywhere books are sold, was the book that I originally wanted to write. But it felt like it was the middle of Abby's story, or the middle of the beginning of Abby's story, and I needed a precursor. So I wrote Abby Cooper Psychic Eye, and then this was the book I was like dying to get to. Not literally. Punny.
Well, good thing it was a 3-book deal, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I know, right? Like if it had been the one and done, I would have been, damn it. Never got to tell that story. So the book was inspired by my mentor, probably one of the world's best psychics who ever lived. His name was Kevin Allen. He was an absolute legend here in the Metro Detroit area. I knew him for 25 years, loved him for every single one of those years. He was humble and kind and incredibly talented, and kind of never thought too much about that. Like he wanted to be known for other things. And he passed away very suddenly in his sleep at the very young age of 56. And I miss him every single day. He's been gone for 2 years and I miss him every single day. I loved him very, very much. Anyway, Kevin once told me a story 22 or 3 years ago. He told me a story about taking a job to be one of 2 psychics at a large Italian wedding. And he said the money was great. So he and this other psychic, a friend of his, took their show on the road and show up at this wedding reception and sit down. They've got their own kind of section away from all the music and the dancing and the food and the cake and all of that stuff. And he starts reading for people that are coming in, one at a time, mostly bridesmaids, etc. And after about an hour, a gentleman comes in, very nondescript, comes in, sits down. And Kevin used to read tarot. Not necessarily that he read tarot, more like he was an intuitive that used tarot as a tool just to kind of glob onto a topic. And so he turns over a card, and it's the Tower card. And he gets an impression right away, and he's jolted by this impression. And he's just kind of staring at the card. And then he decides, well, I need to turn over another card. So he turns over the next card. It's the Death card. And he said, out of his mouth, he looks up at the guy, and out of his mouth, he goes, "Oh my God, you've killed someone." And the guy starts laughing, and he goes, "Hey, you're pretty good."
Just the compliment he was looking
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Oh my God. So Kevin then is like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? So he looks back down at the cards and he's like, well, just keep going. Just keep going. So he flips over another card and and out of his mouth comes, you've killed quite a few people. The guy's like, yes, I have. And Kevin's like, well, you're very good at your job.
Let me give him some affirmations.
Yeah, I don't know what your last evaluation was, but you're
Yeah.
terrific at what
Yeah.
you do. And so, he's reading obviously for a hitman for the mob. And, he's just trying to like get through the reading without dying. And at the end of the reading, the guy tosses him $100 bill as a tip. And he's like, you're terrific. He's like, I'm going to recommend people to you. Kevin was like, please don't, please don't, please don't.
Here are not my cards.
Exactly. Right, exactly. Went home into witness protection, changed his name. So the guy leaves and I said, well, what did you do? What did you do? You're at a mafia wedding. And he goes, I faked a stomach issue, grabbed my buddy. We drove that whole there as fast as we could. We drove away. And he's like, and I never booked another Italian wedding. He's like, I still won't. He's like, I won't do it. So oh God, I love that story. So I asked
Of course,
him,
ran with it.
of course I did. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
That's like
Yeah.
the juiciest thing. That is the juice. How could I not write about that? So I did ask his permission. I said, can I use that in a book? And he was like,
You asked his permission to use something in a book. This is good.
See, but
I won't.
because we're related,
No.
and you know
Mm-mm.
what I do. I feel like I have license.
No, you do not.
I feel
Let's be
like that
clear.
is just unspoken license. Just
20 years of me
We're
saying,
related.
oh my God, stop.
related. Then stop doing things that
Oh
inspire.
yeah, that's really easy. Like, I walked down the street today. Oh, let me put that in a book.
Well, it's not just that you walk down the street
You know
today.
what?
It's
Let's
that you
get back
walk
to
down
this.
the street,
Let's get to the topic.
do something that is fucking hilarious that needs to go in a book. So, I will stop writing about you once you
sounds good.
stop doing interesting and funny things. That's how our agreement. That's how it's going to roll.
No, that is not
This is
our agreement.
Just how
Let's
it's
get back to the book, please.
No, I'm saying that's in my
I don't
mind.
care what you think the agreement is.
That is how
I'm
it's
not agreeing.
That's our
Anyway,
agreement.
Let's get back to poor Kevin, who's deceased and can't defend himself anymore.
Trust me, he can defend himself. Trust me. That man is in my head a lot. Anyway, Better Read Than Dead takes that premise where, of course, Abby goes to a large Italian wedding and she reads for
It's
a
a Greek
mafia
wedding.
hitman.
Greek wedding.
Oh, Greek, large Greek. Yeah. How come you know?
Who wrote the book?
I don't know. They're blending together. I don't know. Italian Greek. I don't know.
A
There was a
Mediterranean
wedding.
wedding.
There was a wedding and something happened. So Better Read Than Dead is the second installment. It takes that story and I just ran with it. And it's one of my favorites, actually.
It is absolutely my favorite Abby
Is it?
book.
You
Yeah.
like this better than like Deadly Forecast?
Yes, this is my favorite Abby book.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Mainly because it's such a page turner. You're on the edge of your seat throughout the entire novel. And just when you think she's come to a point of resolution or rest or respite, nope, something else happens and sends her.
More hijinks ensue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a great read, a great page turner.
Thank you, honey.
Very, very fast paced and lots
you.
of fun.
Thank you. Okay. And I send you money for that, right? I just
No,
write a
no,
check. Yes.
no. You
Send
just
it
stop putting me in your damn books and we'll be
No, that
fine.
will not happen. I'm sorry. You've got to be more boring. If you just were
It
boring.
can be. Challenge accepted.
Oh yeah. No, that'll last a minute and a half. Trust me. So, Better Read Than Dead. And our grandfather had an encounter with Capone.
Al Capone.
Al Capone. Yeah, Al Capone. So my grandfather was living in Chicago. This was before he met our grandmother. He was 20 years my grandmother's senior. So he had a life prior to her. And he raised German Shepherd guard dogs. And he was in a barber shop one morning waiting his turn. reading a newspaper with one of his guard dogs next to him. And Capone ended up walking into the barbershop looking for him and said, you're Laurie, right? And Granddaddy just continued to read his, like, kind of eyed Capone over the top of the newspaper and continued to read the newspaper without even acknowledging Capone. And Capone said, I want one of your guard dogs. And I want to buy one of your guard dogs. And Granddaddy closed the newspaper, folded it, tucked it under his arm, set a command. The German Shepherd started to growl. Then he said another command, and the German Shepherd stopped growling. Granddaddy got to his feet, tucked the newspaper under his arm, looked at Capone and said, you'll never get one of my dogs, Capone, because you're a rotter. And he and the dog walked out. So I'm like, I can't believe he lived to, make it down the street, let alone, 60 years after that. But yeah, he faced down Capone. Or so the legend, the family legend goes. I have no doubt, because my grandfather was absolutely that kind of guy. So yeah.
Well, it didn't hurt that he was 6'4" compared to Al Capone, who was under 5'9", as far as I know and understand.
I think he was even shorter. I think he was like
Yeah.
more in the 4, 5, 6 category, little Napoleon complex. But he had muscle and he had guns. So that was still a little bit of a dicey thing to do. But this is a man. Our grandfather was really, really an interesting human being. He born in Plymouth, England, right? He was born in Plymouth, pretty sure. Yeah, born in Plymouth, orphaned at, I don't know, 6 or 7, looked after his brother, was pulled out of an orphanage by his maternal uncle, sent to work in the mines. And at the age of 14, when he was 16 and his brother turned 14, his uncle tried to send his brother into the mines too. And that night, Granddaddy grabbed his brother by the hand and they escaped to the wharfs, where they stowed away on a ship and were discovered, and they became deckhands, earning their keep. And at some point he kept trying to get to Australia, which I find so funny. The first, I think, took him like to Argentina. And then the next one took him, I think, to Brazil. And finally he docked in Houston on his way to Australia. Of course, that's where you go. You dock in Houston on your way to Australia. And he got off the ship and loved Houston, loved the weather, all of that. And took a shine to a very beautiful woman there. And they, kind of took up hanging out together. And then her husband arrived home with a shotgun, and Granddaddy hightailed it out of Houston, made his way up to Oklahoma, was doing manual labor in Oklahoma. And someone said, there are jobs in Chicago. And my grandfather said, where's Chicago? And they said, north, just head north. And so my grandfather literally walked from Oklahoma to Chicago. He just kept asking people along the way, which way to Chicago, and kept getting, that way north. So he finally made his way to Chicago, and he lived there for, I don't know, until he was in his 80s, right? He didn't move to California stands until he was in his 80s, correct?
I think so.
Yeah, something like that.
For someone who loved the Houston weather, he ends up in Chicago for most of his life. Not the best of choices, but still.
I know. Yeah. Well, yeah. So, and then, Granddaddy was out for his 5-mile shuffle jog, slog, and his apartment was across the Pacific
Coast
Highway, and he was jaywalking. Thought he could make it. Thought he could jog across without and get there in time, and he was hit by a car at 89, and still lived a couple of weeks beyond that in a coma before he finally succumbed. So he was an incredible character. Sands and I both remember him so fondly. So yeah, that's the legend of Carl Laurie, an amazing guy. And then I have an anecdote this week that also has mafia connections, because of course I do. I did this, I think this was 2 weeks ago. I did a series in a night. I literally read for 4 people who all had mafia connections in their family. Their family all had mafia connections. Some had connections to the mafia in Chicago. Some had connections to Jimmy Hoffa. Actually, two of my clients had relatives who had connections to Jimmy Hoffa. And you were like, do they know where he is?
Yeah. Did they share where he might be?
Yeah, no, I don't know.
Talk about going out for a walk and never coming
Yeah,
back.
exactly. The Fox and Hounds, right?
Mhm.
Which is not too far from where I live now. The Fox and Hounds. Jimmy Hoffa was apparently kidnapped right outside of the Fox and Hounds in the 70s, right? Something like that.
I think so.
Yeah.
Why do you keep confirming with me history? I have no freaking idea.
Because you're supposed to know this stuff. All you
Oh,
have to do
okay.
is just nod. Right?
Okay.
If I'm like, it was this, right?
Sure.
Just be like, absolutely.
Sounds good.
Trusty sidekicks are just supposed to back up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You know,
Forgive me. I will
exactly.
do that.
They're just supposed to back up the host, like no matter what I say.
Yes.
Little green men are outside my door. Yeah, I know. I see them. Like that. Anyway, so I had 4 clients in a row, almost in a row, who had mafia connections. So it was a mafia themed night. And the most interesting and actually the most touching one was my client Kelly, who I've read for a couple of times before, and absolutely love this woman. She is such a dear, sweet, kind, just a lovely human being. So anyway, Kelly had needed a kidney transplant for quite a while. She was kind of at the end of the dialysis, being able to be treated with dialysis, and it was getting really dicey. And I had predicted that in the fall that she would get her kidney. Sure enough, the end of September, boop, she got her kidney.
Wow.
So she's great. The kidney is working beautifully. She is back to being able to live her life, and all is well with the world. But when I started reading her, she'd actually signed her husband up for a reading. My bird is making all sorts of noises. One moment, please. Sandy will entertain you while I close the door. One moment.
I have nothing to say. So here we are. And she's back. Thank you, baby Jesus.
I have nothing to say. Yes. Okay, trusty sidekick. We need to get you like some material for these times when I'm like, oh, one moment, please.
I really appreciate all the spitballing you're doing during this podcast. You're gonna, sign me up for a contract where you can exploit every personal story in my life.
Yes.
And I'm supposed to say, yes, there are green men sitting outside of your door. And
no, just agree with me. Just agree with me. Even if I
whatevs.
Even if
this
what
is
I say
what I heard. And now I'm supposed to be material on hand in case. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I think this is even in the sidekick handbook somewhere.
Let's just be clear. This is not what I signed up for. And there is no such thing as a sidekick handbook.
There is.
Okay.
And I'm going to write it and I'm going to send it to you. And it will include all sorts of rules.
Fantastic. I'm so excited. Can't wait.
Yes. Anyway, back to Kelly. Okay. So Kelly signed her husband up for a session. At the last minute, her husband said, I don't feel comfortable with this. I really just don't want to do it. So I'm expecting her husband. The Zoom pops on and there's Kelly. And I had literally just read for her not too long ago. And she's like, my hubby didn't want to be on. What do you want to do? And I'm like, well, I'll read for him through you, which I could do. And what was really interesting was because I was in that mindset, the very first person to step forward was his grandfather. So his grandfather steps forward and was giving me kind of all of these interesting details. Like I felt like this guy was deeply involved in gambling and bookkeeping, and wasn't afraid of a little violence. And all of that was Kelly's confirming. And I said, I truly think he either witnessed a murder or participated in one. I felt more like he witnessed one, and maybe more than one. And then the most interesting thing was he showed me a checkerboard, and I had this feeling like he had a checkered past, was my sense, which I thought was a really cool metaphor. Because the checkerboard had no checkers on it. It was just a checkerboard. Like I had checkered past. The other thing that I found really super interesting was here he is, he's this, kind of thug. He's a thug, and yet he's deeply religious. So he was someone who would go to church, every Sunday and, do the cross, sign of the cross.
Penance. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Right. And I felt like he was saying you could do whatever you wanted here as long as you sought forgiveness and last rites before you died. So it was like his get out of
Really?
jail.
That's super interesting.
Get out of jail free card. And everybody goes to the other side. Everybody's on the other side. He made it to the other side. He was communicating from the other side. So I thought that was super interesting. He was also, I picked up that he was a clothes horse. He loved to show his wealth, express his wealth. And as he's kind of saying all of this, he is then sending such pride down to his grandson. And he's saying, you broke the chain. So his grandson is nothing like his grandfather, nothing. His grandson is kind and sweet and nurturing, a wonderful father, and, a really, really, really special human being, and has nurtured and taken care of Kelly all through her kidney illness. And the grandfather was especially proud of him as a husband and a father, and how loving and nurturing he was. So I thought that was really beautiful. Then after all of that, a gentleman stepped forward, and he was saying that his name was Ben. And I'm like, okay. I asked Kelly, I'm like, do you know a Ben? She's like, no. I said, okay. And in my mind's eye, I kept seeing Benjamin Franklin. So
really? You're kidding. You mean this guy?
That Ben Franklin?
Did
Yes,
he
that
resemble
one.
this person? Did he have like long hair and spectacles? Was he flying a kite?
In a rainstorm. Yeah.
In a rainstorm,
with a key on
electricity
it.
came
Yes.
down.
Yeah, absolutely. That was him.
Was he on
the most
$100
wanted
bill?
That's him. The most wanted sign. Yes, on the other side. Anyway, so in my mind's eye, I kept seeing Benjamin Franklin. And so I was asking, is there Ben or Benjamin? She said, no. Is there a Franklin? No. Frank? No. And I'm like, okay, I don't know who this is, but this guy just came in and he is, I think, connected to your husband, but I'm not sure how. And he's bringing like all of the men from your side and from your husband's side, and they're all standing there clapping for you, clapping. And really what they were saying was they were so proud of her for standing at death's door and saying, not today, motherfucker. Truly, she was on the brink, and she fought to stay here until she could get that kidney, and she did. And then collectively, they brought in her donor, which was so amazing. This was a guy who was, I think, late 20s when he passed away, was in a car accident. And it was this really, like almost, I'm going to say special because it was, but it's a weird kind of special because I had literally predicted this man's death, because I had predicted that Kelly would get his kidney in the fall, right? So however many months before that, 6 months before, I was saying, yes, you'll get a kidney in the fall. And here he is stepping forward, the guy whose kidney she got.
Amazing.
And he was, killed in a traffic accident. And he stepped forward and was so grateful to Kelly. So grateful. So here she's grateful because he saved her life, right? By becoming an organ donor. And yet he's the one showing and expressing so much gratitude because part of him continues to live. And so he's still connected to his kidney, and still gets to experience life in a little bit. And it was
another way to kind of observe how his,
like essence. Just like, almost like, when you cross over, you leave the ability to kind of feel, hear, sense, taste this world in all of its kind of 3D, expression. And through his kidney, I felt like he was still able to make that connection. So like if she eats a pizza, he probably can taste the pizza, because there's a
Interesting.
part of him still in her. So there was just this outpouring of gratitude from him. And I just felt like in that moment, like the three of us were like in this connection, in this weird, wonderful, amazing, miraculous kind of connection where I'm the messenger, but I'd also been the predictor, and there was no sadness or regret that he had passed away, just gratitude for her for taking good care of his kidney. And I also predicted that she probably would have this particular kidney for at least 10 years, which is sort of at the farthest end of when organs start to fail.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you only get like 5 to 10 at the most out of an organ, out of a kidney. I don't know out of any organ, but out of a kidney, it's usually just about a decade before they start to fail, because it's eventually your body will reject it at some point, eventually. The good news for Kelly is, and I have actually predicted this twice, is that I feel like she'll get 3 kidneys in her lifetime. So this is the first, and she'll get a second, and then I think they'll grow one for her, because I kept seeing a 3D printer spit out a kidney. So I think, in 15, 20 years from now, I think that we'll have the technology to make a kidney, which would be fantastic, right?
Amazing.
Would be fantastic. So because if we can make a kidney, we can make anything else, right?
It's like the $6 million woman.
Exactly.
The bionic woman.
Exactly. Print. So that was a super beautiful, amazing reading with her. And there was other stuff in there, like just the room was just so crowded with love, just love for her husband. Her husband's best friend passed over as well, and he was there. It was just a beautiful, like those are the readings that you remember, that you carry with you.
I'm sure.
So yeah, beautiful soul. So yeah, that's the anecdote for today.
Nice.
Yeah.
Really lovely.
Thank you. So let's get to George Reeves. This was so good, Sandy. This was so good.
Interesting
I
story,
love
for
that
sure.
you're bringing this forward, because it's a great story. Like I had no idea all of this backstory when I heard about. I don't know how old I was, but however many years ago I heard about George Reeves' death, that he had passed away from suicide. That's just sort of how I had it in my mind, that Superman died of suicide. I think actually even our mother actually mentioned how he
they
had
used
passed
to
away.
run reruns when we were younger on television in black and white. And I think that, it was a program that we were interested in.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. All right.
Okay.
So take it away.
So George Reeves was best known for playing the Man of Steel in the 1950s highly popular TV show, The Adventures of Superman. Then on June 16th, 1959, George was found dead in his Benedict Canyon Drive home from a single gunshot wound to his head. In the windowless upstairs bedroom, George was discovered lying naked on his bed in a pool of blood with his feet on the floor and a bullet in his brain. The 9mm Luger was between his feet, a shell casing beneath his corpse, and a thick spray of his gore was spattered up the bedroom wall toward the slanted ceiling. No gunpowder residue was found on the actor's skin, no fingerprints on the gun because it was too thickly coated in oil to hold fingerprints. And there were mysterious bullet holes found in the house. 2 were in the floor and 1 was lodged in the wall of the downstairs living room. The police were not called for nearly an hour after George's body was discovered. Upon arrival, they found that George had not been alone in his house at the time of his death. His fiancée, Leonore Lemon, house guest Robert Condon, neighbor Carol von Ronkel, and party guest Robert Bliss, who arrived after midnight, were all gathered in the living room, stupefied with drink. The LAPD and coroner determined somewhat hastily that it was an open and shut case of suicide. And while the case was never reopened, the questions surrounding George's death have never been satisfactorily laid to rest. What happened on the night of June 16th that led to George Reeves' death? Interestingly, there's no shortage of suspects or motives that indicate he did not die by suicide, but instead may have been murdered. Was George perhaps killed by his lover, Tony Mannix, or his fiancée, Leonore Lemon? Born on January 5th, 1914, George grew up in Pasadena with his overbearing and possessive mother, Helen, and his stepfather, Frank Basolo. By 1937, George had leveraged his handsome good looks to join the Pasadena Playhouse, a movie star incubator. He was signed to Warner Brothers and then to Paramount, but World War II interrupted his ascent to stardom. So by 1951, he was reduced to walk-on parts and became discouraged by his lack of promising work. And then Toni Mannix took him under her wing, and everything changed. A vivacious ex-Ziegfeld girl, Toni was 8 years George's senior, and for years she had been Eddie Mannix's mistress and had only recently married him when she and George met. Eddie Mannix wasn't overly worried about his wife and George, as the Hollywood fixer for MGM with ties to the LA chief of police, the notorious Bugsy Siegel, and an array of Irish and Jewish wise guys in and around New Jersey's Palisades Park, Eddie had a fearsome reputation, and the MGM casting couches gave him access to any woman he wanted. In fact, he and his own mistresses often went on double dates with George and Toni. Eddie's success enabled Toni to keep George comfortable while supplying his house, car, clothes, furniture, and vacations. And while Toni Mannix seemingly owned George Reeves, their relationship was a loving one and intended for marriage once the ailing Eddie Mannix finally succumbed to one of his frequent heart attacks. Their home on Benedict Canyon Drive was always full of their friends, with alcohol flowing freely from day to night. In early 1959, after a decade together, George left Toni Mannix for Leonore Lemon, a party girl and a reputed gold digger with a volatile temper. This was a surprising ending to their affair, as for George, Toni was his financial salvation, his soulmate, and his companion through his happiest years. For Toni, the breakup was a big blow. Without George, she felt doomed to a life of waiting for Eddie Mannix to die, something that seemed to be taking a very long time. Eddie, in fact, passed away in 1963. She sequestered herself at home, cried for weeks, and phoned George up to 20 times a day. She became so inconsolable, her friends and husband worried for her health. For all his philandering, Eddie was devoted to his wife. Mess with her, and you had to deal with him. George himself was convinced it was Toni behind a string of strange incidents that had befallen him in the aftermath of their breakup. He was inundated with menacing silent phone calls at all hours of the night, and his beloved dog Sam had been abducted. 2 months before his death, George was injured in a car accident, after which his mechanic reported that the brake lines had been cut. Did Eddie Mannix have a hand in George's death? His reputation as a fixer seems to support that theory. If strong-armed men were needed to seek vengeance for the aggrieved Toni, Eddie Mannix had them on retainer. But did Eddie ever use them? Or was it in fact his wife Toni who called upon Eddie's minions? Some theorize that party guest William Bliss, for unknown reasons, distracted the revelers on the night of George Reeves' death, permitting someone to get upstairs and kill George. The relative inaccessibility of the bedroom seems to make this unlikely, unless witnesses downstairs were scared into silence. Superman cast member Phyllis Coates, who played Lois Lane, told the authors of Hollywood Kryptonite that she had received a disturbing phone call from Toni Mannix at 4:30 in the morning on George's death. She was hyperventilating and ranting, recalled Phyllis. She said, "The boy is dead. He's been murdered." In 1999, Beverly Hills publicist Edward Losey claimed on the tabloid TV show Extra that before her death, a bedridden Toni Mannix had confessed to her priest, while Losey was present, that she had had George Reeves killed. Losey said that none of the thugs who worked for Eddie Mannix were alive anymore, and he now felt safe to talk about it. He later told the LA Times that Toni had confessed because she was absolutely terrified of going to hell. Again, her confession provides no practical explanation of how the TV star was killed with a house full of witnesses. Despite the official ruling of suicide, George's fiancée, Leonore Lemon, who often bragged about her strong association with New York gangsters, remained a prime suspect for years following George's death, in part because she had predicted that night that George would kill himself. She later stated that it was an off-the-cuff remark along the lines of, "He's probably going to shoot himself." She meant nothing by it and said it was a stupid thing to say. On the night George died, he and Leonore had gone out to dinner and had many drinks, leaving guest Robert Condon in the house. The couple returned home around 11 p.m. George went to bed alone around midnight, but came downstairs an hour later in an irritable mood when Robert Condor's lover, Caravan Ronkel, a married neighbor, arrived with William Bliss, a relative stranger who lived nearby. Robert Condon later said that George apologized for his bad mood and returned upstairs. Then, according to the police report, Leonore said, "He's going to shoot himself." Whereupon, through the thin ceiling, they heard a bedside drawer open. "He's getting the gun out now and he's going to shoot himself," Leonore continued. And sure enough, a shot rang out. William Bliss ran upstairs and found George dead on the bed. At least this is how the 4 very drunk witnesses said the situation occurred in a police interview conducted that early morning. Regarding the mysterious bullet holes found in the house, Leonore claimed that the bullet lodged in the living room wall got there after she had fired the gun during an argument with George. Again, the weapon was too recently oiled to retain fingerprints. Is it possible that the fight took place between the couple and it occurred in the bedroom? According to author Lee Saylor, after several years of investigating, interviews, and research, he believes that Leonore and George had an angry fight that day. And George was reportedly depressed about his career because he had been typecast as Superman and had been drinking heavily that night. Saylor contends that during a fight between the soon-to-be married couple, George pulled a handgun from the bedroom nightstand and shot himself in the head right in front of Leonore. The only 2 people in the house, Carol Van Ronkel and Robert Condon, were both drunk and passed out together in a downstairs bedroom and apparently did not hear the gunshot. Saylor believes Leonore Lemon, in shock and likely guilt-ridden for having driven her fiancé to suicide, headed downstairs in anticipation of the arrival of more guests. William Bliss showed up sometime after midnight. A short time later, Robert Bliss headed upstairs, perhaps at Leonore's request, and discovered George's nude body lying across the bed with a 9mm Luger between his feet. Leonore admitted that the police weren't called for at least an hour because she wanted to protect Carol's marriage, and that she called 2 other girlfriends for help. She also made one additional phone call that she didn't admit to the police to her former lover and New York City attorney, Edward B. Williams. In Williams' autobiography, he claims that Leonore called him in the middle of the night and said, "Superman is dead." Williams told her to call the police and keep your mouth shut. Leonore attempted without success to claim a share of George Reeves' estate. George had left everything to his lover, Tony Mannix. Ever the opportunist, a week following his death, the evidence seal on the property was broken, apparently by Leonore, who took off to New York, never to return again, with $4,000 in traveler's checks in hand that George had purchased for their honeymoon. 30 years later, when she was in a declining state, Leonore confessed to a young reporter that Robert Bliss had concocted her step-by-step predictions of George's suicide. Her subsequent flight from the law was to escape any motive that she may have had for bumping off Superman. Still, it's plausible that a drunken argument between the couple over the gun resulted in a fatal, albeit accidental, discharge. The coroner's autopsy took place only after the corpse had been thoroughly washed. It failed to test for gunpowder traces on George Reeves' hand, and even though the top of his skull was removed, no one checked the head wound for gunpowder traces, which would have been present if he'd shot himself at close range. Nothing explained the bruises on his face or chest, and he showed no signs of suicidal demeanor, left no note, and died naked, all extremely unusual circumstances for a suicide. None of his friends could believe that George, a glad-handing, straight-shooting, life-loving guy, had a plausible reason to do away with himself. Only his Superman co-star, Jack Larson, who played Jimmy Olsen, accepted the verdict because he felt George had made such a mess of things with his beloved patroness at the time when his career was apparently in ruins. Was George Reeves' career in ruins? Not necessarily. Although much has been made of his frustration of being typecast as Superman and the limitations the role had condemned him to as an actor, acting was not likely in his future. He had ably directed several of the later episodes of Superman and was well positioned for a TV directing career, which he took seriously. George was also recently engaged and would have been married 3 days after he died on June 19th in Mexico. A honeymoon in Spain and then a trip to Australia for public appearances as Superman had been arranged and was eagerly anticipated. While George had been drinking heavily on the night he died, he was known to have a constitution of an elephant. Drink never seemed to affect him. While the death of George Reeves has allegedly been solved, the manner of his death will likely remain a mystery as all the witnesses are now dead or scattered, and the coroner's ruling of suicide is filed and the archives are closed. My sources for this story were The Mysterious Death of Superman, a local man's story of the night George Reeves died by William Lopez, The Argus Observer in May of 2013, and then Who Killed Superman by John Patterson, The Guardian in November of 2006.
So fascinating. The story is so much richer than, the lore, so to speak, right? Yeah. So when you first mentioned that you wanted to do this to me, and you said, there are questions around his death, that it probably wasn't suicide. I think my immediate thought to you or sentence to you was it was a mob hit, right?
Mhm. Yes.
And I felt that boom, like immediately, and had never really even considered this story at all. So it was interesting how just kind of the mention of the story, boom, I went to Mafia Hit and had no idea that he was involved with a fixer's wife.
Mhm.
I thought that was interesting. And then in getting into the story, how you typed it up, um, perfectly, beautifully. I had a couple of thoughts. My very first thought was George Reeves undeniably was an alcoholic, right? And
Probably, yeah.
yeah, and alcoholics need an enabler. They need to surround themselves with people who will enable them to drink without questioning them, without accusing them, without restricting them or constraining them. And I felt very strongly that Tony got to a point where she was trying to get George to sober up,
Wow.
where she was trying to um, bring him back from this functioning alcoholic kind of downward slide that he was on, because she saw a future with him.
Yes.
And because he felt that she was no longer his sidekick, in enabling, he dropped her and went for the party
Wow.
girl, Leonore,
That
who,
is so interesting.
right?
Really. Yeah.
Because this
Makes
is his new
sense.
enabler, right?
Right. Right.
So she's not going to question him. She's a gold digger. She's like, whatever you want to do, right? You want to drink all night? Fantastic. You want to party? Let's do it. She was giving him the freedom to continue sort of the downward spiral into alcoholism. I think that Tony was, it was true that Tony was inconsolable, that it killed her to know that he had taken up with not just another woman, but a younger woman because
Yes.
she was older. And also that this was a woman who was like, you want more to drink, George? Here you go, right? So she was going to be the cause of his destruction as well. And I think Tony truly, truly devastated. My theory is she said to her husband something along the lines of, it would have been easier to mourn him if he had just died,
Oh my goodness. Wow.
right? Because it
Yeah.
would have been, right?
Yeah.
This ongoing affair that he's
In her
having with,
face, basically.
exactly, with
Yeah.
Leonore,
He's
right?
actually engaged to her at this
Right.
point. Yeah.
Right. So it's in her face. It's ongoing. There will never
The
be a
wedding's
relief from
happening
it.
in 3 days from the date of his
Exactly.
death.
There will never be a relief from it. They will
Mhm.
always be this married couple. He will always have dumped her for this other woman. And
Right.
it's day after day after day of her having to experience this loss. And to her, it would have been easier if he had just died. Right.
Mhm.
And then she could have mourned him. He's gone. It's not for another woman. He's just dead.
She's not rejected. She's just in mourning.
Exactly.
Big
Exactly. That's
difference.
it. That's it. Yeah. So she's almost like the widower, the widow, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that she said that to Eddie, and Eddie, I believe, truly loved Tony.
Mhm.
Not necessarily in a possessive, you're my wife, no one can have you way. Obviously, if they're going out on double dates with his mistresses and George, I think that he liked George, but I think he loved Tony.
Mm.
And I don't know that this was necessarily an insult to him. It was more like, you mess with my wife, you mess with me. I think it was more he just couldn't see his wife this devastated and know that it was going to be pretty much the rest of her life that she would be this devastated.
Wow.
And so he, I think, took that statement. It would have been easier if he was dead, and he made it happen. That's my theory, is that he made it happen. I don't think, what happened after midnight, after 1 a.m. I don't think that Leonore at all said, oh, he's going to shoot himself. I think that's bullshit. I think that was made up. I have a feeling that Eddie was in contact with her shortly after that murder, and shortly after that murder, and was like, you better go along or you're next.
Oh,
You're
wow.
lucky I didn't kill you, kind of thing. Right. So he got everybody to kind of agree on a story, and he manipulated it to kind of make her look guilty in some fashion, right? Like she pushed him into the suicide. So Eddie was
Right.
very clever in this, is my theory. I do believe there was a hitman. I believe he entered the home. I believe that one of the house guests did distract everybody, have more to
William
drink, have
Bliss.
more to drink. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there was a scuffle upstairs. Maybe the guests downstairs were aware, maybe they weren't. They certainly were aware of the gunshot. How things unfolded after that were very carefully orchestrated. It's an hour from the time. I mean,
Yeah.
seriously, you hear a gun go off, someone's dead upstairs. I don't care. I don't care who you are. That's immediate 911. That's immediate call the police, right?
Mhm.
Immediately. Someone call for help. That is not, oh, he's died. Let me call my girlfriends. Let me call my lawyer. Right? That's not happening. Do I think it could have been a fight between the two of them, and she goaded him? No, I just don't. I don't think that he was the type to go to be goaded into committing suicide. I just don't get that from him at all. I don't get that from his energy. I don't get that from the fact that how his body was found, naked, the bruises on his chest and his face too, right? Did he have bruises on his face?
Yeah, I believe so.
There was a scuffle, and he was a big guy.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think she was thin, right? Small and thin.
She was tall, but she was a thin woman. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's not inflicting bruises, right?
No.
That's a hitman. That's a hitman.
Well, I also think there was a cover up with the police because Eddie Mannix had an in with the chief of police in LA.
Exactly.
And all of the examination of the body, the examination of the coroner,
Yeah.
they just dismissed a lot of the clues that he had been murdered.
Right. Yeah. So, murder and cover up. And then the phone call that Tony makes to Lois Lane at 4:30 in the morning, saying he's been murdered. I think the timing of that, it's 4:30 in the morning, right? So he's murdered right around 1 a.m.
Yes.
Okay. You're the hitman that's been hired to do that. This is why I don't think Tony did it. You're the one that is hired to murder Superman, right? You murder him. That's an immediate phone call to her. The deed is done, right? You're not waiting until 4. And I have a feeling that that phone call to Phyllis Coates, who was Lois Lane, I have a feeling that was one of the first phone calls she made. Tony made. I guarantee you that was one of the first phone calls she made outgoing, was to his co-star of all of those years. So that's a 3.5 hour spread.
Yep.
I think during those hours, Eddie got word, handled how it was going to unfold at the house. That's the hour, right? Afterward,
Yes.
the police get called. He's given assurance. This is how the story's going to get told. After all of that, he goes upstairs and tells Tony, this is what happened. Superman's been murdered. I don't know that he took ownership of it.
Right.
I doubt that he took ownership of it. He could have said, I just got word, I just heard, but I'm sure he told her. And it was to end the suffering, so to speak, right? Begin one suffering that had an ending and end the suffering that wouldn't have an ending. So that's how I think it all unfolded.
That is so fascinating.
Yeah.
Seriously, it makes tremendous sense what you intuited. Yeah, big time.
So.
I think William Bliss probably did have a hand in corralling the guests at the house, because he was not someone anybody really knew well, but somehow managed to get an invitation to the small party.
Right.
The other really interesting thing that stood out to me was the house was a Cape style home. There was no window upstairs in the bedroom where George was killed.
Yeah.
So whoever entered and exited had to come through the house in order to access that bedroom.
Right.
So it's not like they climbed in and out of the window and, again, no possibility other than the story that needed to be told.
Right. So it was all arranged. The story was all arranged and choreographed. The whole thing was choreographed. Yeah, it just doesn't have the feel of like a spontaneous, you know, this just kind of happened thing. And I think Eddie had been trying to kill George. I think
with the breaks.
the breaks,
Yeah.
exactly. If he kind of has an accident and
Yeah.
dies, then Tony spared the fact that he's been murdered, right?
Yep.
And I guess it's hard to kill Superman. So yeah, that's how I think it all unfolded.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who
Thank
knows
you.
if I'm right, but that's my theory.
It makes
So.
for a really interesting interpretation, I
Mhm.
think, of
Well,
the
the whole
facts.
alcoholism angle really made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Because I've not to air more dirty laundry, but I've been involved with someone who is a functioning alcoholic for a period of time, and then a very non-functioning alcoholic for a period of time. And the time at which we started to have real issues and real problems was when I kept pushing him to sober up. I kept pushing him, please get into the program, please get help, please get into rehab. And that's when it went really south for us. And it wasn't me pushing it to go south. It was him pulling away because I was no longer enabling him. So it made sense to me why George would dump Tony.
Yeah, supposedly they were in deep love with one another
Right.
and, been together for 10 years. And
Right.
then all of a sudden he abruptly ends the relationship.
Right.
I think my understanding is he traveled to New York for a promotion, and that's where he met Leonore, and came home and told Tony, well, she makes me feel young. And it was such a devastating thing to say to this woman he's been involved with, who's
Right.
8 years his senior.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah. And, translation, she makes me feel young. I can drink all I want and she doesn't judge me. And I can stay out all hours of the night and she doesn't judge me. And Tony was probably anticipating her husband's death was imminent and that they would get married and they would set up house and be a normal couple. And so this constant alcohol and friends through this party atmosphere would come to an end. So I think she was trying to mature the relationship. And I think he saw that as stifling and harsh as mellow, so to speak. He's deep into alcoholism at the time. And you can tell because he's got the constitution of an elephant. Right. The only way to get a constitution of an elephant is to drink excessively constantly. So that, and that's alcoholics in general. They process alcohol differently. So they often don't look like they're inebriated. Until they're really, really smashed. So that's how it kind of feels to me. It unfolded, whether I'm right or wrong.
Really interesting.
We'll never know, but that's my theory.
So. Really interesting. Thank you so much.
That's awesome. Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you. Do you like my hat? No, I do not.
No, I do not. Goodbye, goodbye.
Inside joke. Okay, so next week you've got for the next couple podcasts, you've got some really interesting ones coming up. I love the one that's in Alaska, right? Is it Alaska?
It is Alaska. Correct, Alaska.
Fishing boat with people murdered and disappearing and all of that stuff. I cannot wait to read that and dive into what could have happened. And then what's the other one?
I believe it took place in 1949. A judge's wife disappeared from her home, and her young child saw her being carried out by a man in a coat and a hat, and the mother thrown over his shoulder, excuse me. So yes, I will look forward to bringing those stories in greater detail, fleshing them out.
More terrible murder stories we're looking forward to. Yeah. All right. Well, that's all we've got for today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to know more about me, I would love for you to get to know more about Sandy, but Sandy's very private. She's very private. So this is the most that you get to know about her.
I'm
not
a
enough,
sidekick.
Just a taste, just a nibble. That's it. Just a nibble, but you can, feast on all the stuff about me. VictoriaLaurie.com. You can check out my books. You can check out, if you want a session, you can sign up for a session with me there. All the good stuff is on VictoriaLaurie.com. And Laurie is spelled Leura, just in case you're wondering. So everybody have a wonderful week. We will see you next week for episode 7. And thank you for listening. Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you, Sandy. Love you. Love you.
Love you too.
Love you.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye.